In 479 BC, a woman was dragged into a room inside the Persian royal palace. What was done to her body was so extreme that the ancient historian who recorded it, a man who had spent his life documenting wars, mass executions, and ritual sacrifice across 3 continents, paused before writing it down. She was not a criminal. She was not a prisoner of war. She was not a slave. She was royalty, the wife of the king's own brother, a woman from one of the most protected bloodlines on earth. And the order did not come from the king. It came from the queen. But the reason it happened, the specific traceable chain of decisions that put this woman in that room started years earlier on a battlefield 1,000 miles away, with a king who had just suffered the most public humiliation of his life and could not accept what he had become. Before this is over, a sacred oath will be weaponized. A hand-woven robe will function as a confession no one can deny. A royal birthday will become an inescapable trap. And an entire branch of the Persian royal family will be erased from existence, not by a foreign army, not by revolution, from the inside, by the people who shared the same blood. And the man who caused all of it will be murdered in his own bed by the men he trusted to protect him while he slept. This is how it happened. Crimson Historians covers the parts of history that mainstream sources leave out. And this story is one of the reasons why, if that is the kind of content you want to see more of, subscribe now. It is free and it directly determines whether stories like this one keep getting made. To understand what happened inside that palace, you need to understand what happened outside of it first. In 480 BC, Xerxes I launched the largest military operation the ancient world had ever seen. Even conservative modern estimates places combined forces at over 200,000 men. For context, most Greek city-states could field armies in the low thousands. Sparta's entire military citizen class was fewer than 10,000. Xerxes was not invading Greece. He was erasing it. He had inherited the campaign from his father, Darius I, who had been defeated at Marathon in 490 BC and died before. Launching a second attempt, Xerxes took the project personally. He spent 4 years preparing. He ordered a canal dug through the peninsula of Mount Au so his fleet would not repeat the route that had wrecked his father's ships. He had pontoon bridges built across the Hellespont. When a storm destroyed the first set, Xerxes ordered the water itself whipped and branded with hot irons. That detail is often presented as madness. It was not, it was theatre. Xerxes ruled an empire of dozens of ethnic groups and languages. His authority rested on the perception that he operated on a different plane than ordinary men. Punishing the sea was a message to his own army. And for a time the message held. His forces crossed into Europe. At Thermopylae, a Greek rearguard led by 300 Spartans held a narrow pass for 3 days before being outflanked and destroyed. Xerxes pushed south. Athens was evacuated and burned. Greece appeared to be falling. Then came Salamis. The Greek fleet lured the Persian navy into a narrow strait. The passage was too tight for Persian ships to maneuver. Vessels collided with each other. Command signals could not reach the outer formations. The Greeks tore the fleet apart. Xerxes watched from a golden throne positioned on the hillside above the strait. He had placed it there deliberately so the fleet would know the king was watching, so that every captain, every oarsman, every marine would understand that their performance was being observed by the man who could elevate or destroy them with a word. Now that same throne forced him to watch as his ships rammed each other, capsized and burned. When the battle ended, the Greek fleet controlled the strait. The supply line connecting the Persian army to Asia was severed. Without the navy, the land campaign could not be sustained through winter. Xerxes made a decision that would define everything that followed. He left. He did not stay to regroup. He did not attempt to rebuild the fleet. He withdrew from Greece entirely, leaving his general Mardonius behind. With a land army of roughly 80,000, that army fought on for another year before being destroyed at the Battle of Plataea in 479 BC. Xerxes never returned to Greece. He never launched another Western campaign. And that fact, the withdrawal, the silence that followed it, the 14 years of inward retreat is where this story actually begins. Xerxes was not deposed. The Persian Empire was still the largest political entity on earth, stretching from Libya to the Indus Valley, containing roughly a third of the world's population. But empires do not run on territory. They run on perception. Xerxes had crossed the Hellespont with the explicit promise of conquest. He returned without it in a court system where the king's authority was linked to divine favor, where the Achaemenid monarch was presented as the chosen instrument of Ahura Mazda, the god of truth and order. Military failure was not just a setback, it was a theological problem. No one said this openly. Persian court culture did not permit direct criticism of the king, but the behavioral shifts were visible. Governors consolidated regional power, tribute payments slowed, the network of royal informants reported, increasing independence among provincial administrators. Inside the palace, the change was different. Xerxes retreated from military campaigns entirely. For the remaining 14 years of his reign, he launched no major operations. He turned to construction, expanding Persepolis, commissioning elaborate reliefs, emphasizing his titles and divine connection. He also turned to the internal life of the court. A king who has lost the external stage often tries to reclaim authority on the internal one. And Xerxes' internal stage was a palace filled with family, servants, and nobles whose positions depended entirely on his favor. One person in particular caught his attention. Xerxes had a brother named Macestes. Macestes was not a peripheral figure. He had commanded troops during the Greek campaign and governed Bactria, the strategically critical province, covering parts of modern Afghanistan and Central Asia. He was royalty by blood, military by career, and politically significant by position. He was also married, and Xerxes wanted his wife. This is recorded directly in Book 9 of Herodotus's Histories. Xerxes pursued the wife of Mistes. She refused. The king of the Achaemenid Empire, the man who controlled the largest army, the largest treasury, the largest administrative network in the world. And this woman whose name Herodotus does not even record said no. Xerxes did not force the issue, not out of moral hesitation. Herodotus gives no indication ethics played any part. The reason was strategic. Mistes had troops. He had regional authority. He had the loyalty of one of the most militarily capable provinces in the empire. Taking his wife by force would be an act of aggression against my sisters himself. And that would create a problem Xerxes could not afford. Not after Greece, not with the court already watching. So the king changed strategy. He would not go directly at what he wanted. He would rearrange the board until what he wanted was within reach. The tool he used was marriage. He arranged for his eldest son, Crown Prince Darius, to marry Mistis's daughter, a woman named Ate. Royal families in the ancient Near East married within themselves routinely. The Achaemenid dynasty in particular practiced endogamy-keeping bloodlines, wealth, and alliances consolidated within the ruling house. No one would have questioned the match. It looked like standard dynastic maintenance, but the purpose was not consolidation. The purpose was proximity. By marrying Atante into the crown prince's household, Xerxes brought Macestes' entire family physically closer to the royal court, closer to the palace, closer to him. The original target, the mother, was now accessible through the social obligations that came with having a daughter in the king's household. Family visits, court ceremonies, seasonal relocations between Susa and Perculus. Xerxes had engineered a reason for her to be near him without anyone suspecting his motives. But proximity has a way of rearranging intentions. Bridges carry traffic in both directions, and the access Xerxes had created produced an outcome he had not planned for. Xerxes' fixation morphed. It shifted from the mother to the daughter Ate, the woman who had just married his own son. Herodotus does not narrate a seduction. He records the results. Xerxes and Artanta began an affair. His son's wife, his brother's daughter, his daughter-in-law. Every one of those relationships carried its own category of violation. Familial, political, dynastic. And unlike her mother, Ate did not refuse. Why? The honest answer is we do not know. Herodotus does not give her an interior voice. She may have desired the king. She may have feared him. She may have seen an opportunity. In a court where a woman's security depended entirely on male favor, proximity to the most powerful man alive was not a sentimental decision. It was a survival calculation. Or she may have had no real choice at all. The record does not tell us. What the record tells us is that the affair continued in secrecy. Over a period Herodotus does not specify. The court either did not notice or chose not to see. In palaces where the wrong observation could end a life, strategic blindness was a professional skill. But secrecy requires discipline, and Xerxes was not disciplined. He made a promise he could not take back. During one of their encounters, Xerxes swore a royal oath to Ate. She could ask for anything she wanted, and he would grant it. In the Achaemenid system, royal oaths carried religious authority. They invoked Ahura Mazda, the supreme deity whose favor legitimized the king's rule. Breaking such an oath was not embarrassing. It was an act of cosmic disorder. It undermined the very framework that made the king the king. Xerxes made the oath expecting a manageable request. Gold jewelry and estate. Art asked for the robe he was wearing. This was a specific, identifiable garment handwoven by Queen Amistris as a personal gift to the king. The court knew this. When Xerxes wore it, it communicated a message visible to everyone. The queen made this for me. We are united. If our tent wore it, every layer of that message inverted. The queen's own creation on another woman's body. No room for interpretation, no possibility of denial. The robe was a confession sewn into silk. Xerxes understood immediately. He tried to undo it. He offered Arante cities, real revenue-generating cities. She could govern. He offered unlimited gold. Herodotus records that he offered her an army under her personal command. Artante refused everything. She wanted the robe, only the robe. There are two readings of this moment. The first, Arta was reckless. She wanted the most impressive object she could see and did not calculate what it would cost. The second, she understood exactly what she was doing. The robe was not a trophy, it was a mechanism. As long as the affair was secret, she was disposable. The moment it became visible, she became a fact the court had to accommodate. Herodotus does not tell us which reading is correct. Xerxes handed over the robe, because a king could override a law, a king could overturn a sentence. But in Persia, a king could not override a sacred oath. The robe changed hands and the countdown began. Amistris saw the robe on Artente. She did not scream. She did not confront. She did not go to Xerxes. She waited. Amistris was not simply the king's wife. She was the daughter of Otanis, one of the 7 noble conspirators who had overthrown the false king, Smerdis, and placed Darius Wine on the throne. Her political position was inherited independent of Xerxes. She had alliances among the old nobility that predated her marriage. She had her own network of informants, her own leverage within the court, and her position rested on one principle. The queen could not be publicly humiliated without response. This was not vanity. In the Persian court, where dozens of women competed for the king's attention, a queen's power was maintained through the visible, understanding that challenging her carried consequences. The moment that understanding collapsed, every ambitious woman, every rival family, every faction looking for a new patron would begin repositioning. Her mistress did not see the robe and feel betrayed. She saw the robe and identified a threat. And then she made a decision that reveals more about court power than almost anything else in Herodotus. She did not target Artente. She targeted Artene's mother, the wife of Mistes. Herod Audioditus says Amistris believed the mother had orchestrated the affair, that she had pushed Arte toward the king to elevate their branch of the family. Whether Amistris genuinely believed this or simply found it useful to believe, whether this was suspicion or justification, the record cannot tell us. What the record tells us is that she did not act immediately. She did not act impulsively. She looked at the calendar and she waited for one specific day. Once a year on the king's birthday, Persian custom required the king to grant any request made during the royal feast. This was not optional. It was embedded in the ritual structure of the monarchy. Refusing a birthday request, especially one made by the queen before the assembled court, would be a visible violation of tradition, severe enough to undermine the king's own legitimacy. Amistris had waited for this day. During the feast before the nobles, the priests, the military commanders, the provincial governors, she made her request. She asked for the wife of Masses to be handed over to her. Everyone in that room understood what that meant. Xerxes understood what it meant. He tried to stop it. He pleaded with a mistress privately, pulling her aside during the feast, trying to redirect her request, offering alternatives. He proposed other gifts, other satisfactions, other forms of recognition. A mistress held. She had chosen her request. She had chosen her timing. She had chosen her audience. She was not negotiating. Xerxes then left the feast and went to Merces directly. Without explaining the affair, without revealing the queen's plan, without disclosing any of the actual danger, he urged his brother to divorce his wife, to let her go voluntarily. Xerxes offered to arrange a new marriage, a better one. He offered his own daughter as a replacement wife for Mesistus. Think about what that means. The king of the Persian Empire was offering his own child to his brother as a substitute, trying to remove the target before the weapon could land, and he could not explain why. Mistes refused. He had no idea what was happening. No one had told him about the affair, the robe, or the queen's plan. He loved his wife. He saw no reason to abandon her on the vague, inexplicable urging of a brother who would not give a straight answer. and Xerxes trapped between a birthday custom he could not violate, a wife who had outmaneuvered him, and a brother who would not cooperate with the rescue he did not know was being attempted. Gave consent. He handed the woman over. The man who commanded the largest empire in human history had been maneuvered into granting permission for something he actively did not want to happen. The oath to Artante had stripped his control over the secret. The birthday custom stripped his control over the consequence. The tools of his own authority had been turned against him by a woman who understood those tools better than he did. The wife of Mecistius was taken into Amistrus's custody. What followed was systematic physical destruction. Herodotus records that the woman was mutilated. He is specific. Body parts were severed, targeted at features that carried social identity, that communicated status, that allowed participation in public life. She was not killed. She was left alive, conscious, and returned, carried back through the corridors of the palace, past the same guards, the same servants, the same officials who had seen her walk in whole. This was not conducted in secrecy. It was not a quiet disappearance that could be denied later. The woman was sent back into the visible world, permanent, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. Because the purpose was not only to destroy one woman, the purpose was to install a message in the mind of every person who saw her, every noble woman considering her own ambitions, every rival family weighing its options, every faction looking for a crack in the queen's authority. The message did not need to be spoken. It was written on a human body. This is what happens. The wife of Mecistius had not conducted the affair. She had rejected Xerxes when he approached her. By every indication in the historical record, she had done nothing to invite what was done to her. The target was chosen not for guilt. The target was chosen for maximum visibility. Mecistius was a governor. His wife was known. Her condition would be seen, discussed, and remembered across every corridor of the court. And that was the point. When my sister saw what had been done to his wife, his response was immediate. He did not petition the king. He did not seek mediation. He gathered his sons, gathered his household, and turned east toward Bactria. His plan was to raise the province in open revolt against Xerxes, to use his position as governor, his military experience, and the legitimacy of his grievance to assemble a force capable of challenging the throne. For the first time, the private scandal had crossed into imperial security. A governor with royal blood, military credentials, regional loyalty, and a legitimate reason for fury was marching toward an army he personally controlled. If he reached Bactria, the situation became a civil war. Xerxes did not send envoys. He did not open negotiations. He did not offer compensation. He sent soldiers. Fast-moving cavalry units were dispatched with a single instruction. Mecistius and his sons were intercepted on the road before they reached Bactria. They were killed, all of them. An entire branch of the assembled royal family, a brother, his sons, their households, removed from existence, not in battle, not by foreign invasion, not by disease, by a sequence of decisions that started with one man hearing the word no and deciding he could not accept it. After the killings, the Persian Empire continued to function. Taxes were collected, armies were maintained, construction at Pylus moved forward. The administrative machinery Darius I had built was robust enough to absorb internal bleeding without visible collapse. But the court had witnessed something that could not be unwitnessed. The king manipulated by his own customs, unable to protect a member of his own family from a punishment he did not sanction, ordering the execution of his own brother, not over a policy dispute or treason, but over a personal scandal he himself had initiated. For the Persian nobility, men who staked their careers and their families' futures on the stability of the throne, this was information. It told them that proximity to the king was no longer a guarantee of safety, that loyalty could be overridden by impulse, that the rituals meant to stabilize the monarchy could be weaponized by anyone clever enough to understand them. When that kind of information enters a court, it does not leave. It sits in the back of every conversation. It shapes every calculation. It changes the answer to the question that every person near power is always asking. Am I safe? For 14 years, that question circulated through the palaces at Susa and Pepilolis. In 465 BC, the answer arrived. Xerxes was assassinated in his own bedchamber. The man who killed him was Artabanus, commander of the royal bodyguard, the man whose sole institutional function was to keep the king alive while he slept. He was aided by Asperitus, a court eunuch who controlled physical access to the king's private chambers. Consider the geometry of that. the two people with the most intimate access to the king, the man who guarded his door, and the man who held its key, coordinated his death. These were not outsiders. These were not rebels from a distant province. These were the innermost circle, the men who dressed him, who walked beside him, who stood in silence while he slept. They had watched him for years. They had watched the Greek campaign fail. They had watched the Misty's affair unfold. They had watched the rituals of the court weaponized, and the royal bloodline thinned by the king's own decisions. And at some point, we do not know exactly when, they stopped seeing a king worth protecting. The assassination was not a surprise event. It was the final weight on a structure that had been bending since Salamis. After Xerxes' death, his son Artaxerxes I took the throne, but only after Artabanus attempted to seize power himself and was killed in the struggle. The Arnid dynasty survived another 130 years, but the pattern that crystallized during Xerxes' reign, internal destruction, weaponized ritual, loyalty, answered with violence, repeated across generations. Artante disappears from the record after the robe incident. Her fate is unrecorded. The wife of Mistes, the woman who refused a king and was destroyed for someone else's decisions, also disappears. Whether she survived her injuries for years or days, Herodotus does not say. The people who set the events in motion continued to hold power. The people who were caught in the machinery did not. That is the record. Book 9 of Herodotus's Histories, 2,500 years old. Most textbooks skip it entirely. Now you know why. If this is the kind of history that should not stay buried, subscribe and turn on notifications. The next video covers a story older than this one from a dynasty that made the Achaemenid court look restrained. I will see you there.